The alarm rings at 5:30 a.m. Before even getting out of bed, she already knows exactly what she's going to do. Workout at 6 a.m., mirror selfie at the gym, green smoothie with hashtags about healthy living, story showing the perfect morning routine. Only then, after meticulously documenting her existence for 847 followers, does she allow herself to have coffee and actually begin the day. But an uncomfortable question echoes silently. When did she stop living and start merely representing that she lives? Welcome to the performance society, where being has become synonymous with appearing, where existing means being seen existing, and where authenticity has transformed into the most sophisticated of performances. Byung-Chul Han, the philosopher who decoded our era's secrets, observes that we live in a peculiar age. We are all actors, but no one admits to being the audience. We are constantly on stage, performing idealized versions of ourselves for an audience that simultaneously watches us and performs alongside us. In the performance society, it doesn't matter who you are, but how you appear, writes Han. Substance has been replaced by image, depth by carefully polished surface, being by seeming. Look around you. The executive who works late, not to solve urgent problems, but to be seen as dedicated. The mother who documents every special moment with her children, not to preserve memories, but to prove she's a good mother. The young person who travels not to discover the world, but to collect scenarios that confirm their adventurous personality. Performance has become so natural that we barely notice when we're acting. We live in a permanent theater where the stage is all of life and the audience is all of us. If it wasn't posted, it didn't happen. This phrase, repeated like a mantra in the digital age, reveals something disturbing about our relationship with reality. We experience life through the lens of its potential exposure. It's not enough to feel pleasure, joy, or personal fulfillment. Others must see and validate these experiences. Han identifies in this phenomenon what he calls the coercion of positivity. Every experience must be translated into a positive, consumable, shareable image. Real suffering, genuine doubt, authentic failure have no place on the performance stage unless they are aestheticized as narratives of overcoming. The young influencer crying in her stories is performing even her vulnerability. The businessman posting about burnout is converting his exhaustion into content. The person sharing their depression is transforming their pain into social capital. The performance society eliminates the possibility of genuine failure, observes Han. Even our failures must be successful. Before, we confessed our sins secretly to a priest. Today, we confess our existence publicly through selfies. Every self-portrait is a small cry. I exist, see how I exist. But observe the evolution of the selfie. It began as spontaneity and became industry. Studied angles, calculated lighting, trained expressions, the supposed capture of the natural moment has transformed into the most elaborate of performances. Han perceives that the selfie is not just a photo. It's a ritual of self-affirmation in the performance society. I photograph myself, therefore I am. Could be the new Cartesian cogito of the digital age, the woman who takes dozens of photos to choose the one that best represents her naturalness, is not consciously lying. She has so deeply internalized the logic of performance that she genuinely believes she's being authentic while meticulously representing her authenticity. We live in an economy where attention has become the most valuable currency. And in this economy, each person has transformed into a personal brand, competing for others' attention. The performance subject exploits themselves, explains Han. They believe they are free, but actually voluntarily submit to the logic of exploitation. The young professional carefully building their LinkedIn image isn't just looking for a job. They're selling a version of themselves. The person obsessively documenting their hobbies isn't simply having fun, they're feeding their personal brand. This logic contaminates even the most intimate spaces. The couple who interrupts their kiss to photograph it isn't preserving the moment, they're converting intimacy into content. The family staging harmony for cameras may be, paradoxically, destroying their real harmony. The most perverse aspect of the performance society is how it has appropriated even the discourse of authenticity. Be yourself has become the slogan of an era where being yourself means convincingly representing a marketable version of who you are. Observe social media full of people being authentically imperfect, genuinely vulnerable, naturally spontaneous. Authenticity itself has become performance, and perhaps the most sophisticated of all. In the transparency society, notes Han, even sincerity becomes strategy. The person posting about their insecurities may be being genuine, but they are also, consciously or unconsciously, performing their genuineness for an audience that values reality. The influencer showing their unfiltered life is using unfiltered as the most refined of filters. The brand adopting a human and authentic posture is performing humanity for commercial purposes. Han diagnoses our epoch as the era of the achievement subject, one who self-exploits while believing they are free. And this subject is exhausted. It's the deep fatigue of those who constantly need to be the best version of themselves for an invisible but always present audience. It's the exhaustion of maintaining narrative coherence across multiple platforms, of responding to different audiences' expectations, of constantly converting life into content. The achievement subject wears themselves out, observes Han. There is no longer another who exploits them. They are exploiter and exploited at the same time. Burnout syndrome, epidemic in our era, is not just professional, it's existential. It's the exhaustion of a life lived as permanent performance, where there's no pause, no backstage, no moment to simply be without representing. One of the most tragic consequences of the performance society is how it has captured even childhood. Children grow up knowing they are constantly photographed, that their lives are documented for virtual audiences, that their spontaneous moments become content for their parents. The child who automatically poses when seeing a camera hasn't learned to be vain. They've learned that existing is being seen existing. The teenager who feels anxiety when not receiving likes is unsuperficial. They're experiencing a real ontological crisis in a society where social validation determines personal worth. The performance society colonizes even the formation of subjectivity, warns Han. Children learn to perform before learning who they are. Paradoxically, in an era of hyper-connection and constant performance, we experience unprecedented levels of loneliness. Han explains this phenomenon. When all relationships become performative, we lose the capacity for genuine encounters. The person surrounded by followers, virtual friends, and professional connections can feel deeply alone because none of these relationships allow them to stop performing. They are seen, liked, commented on, but rarely truly encountered. The performance society prevents the encounter with the other, writes Han. We only encounter mirrors of ourselves. On social media, we tend to follow people who confirm our worldview, consume content that reinforces our beliefs, interact with those who applaud our performances. How much time do we lose preparing our life to be seen instead of simply living it? The person who spends 20 minutes choosing the perfect filter is stealing 20 minutes from the experience they intend to document. The traveler who visits places only to photograph them never really arrived. They passed through scenery without inhabiting it. Han observes that the performance society destroys contemplative experience. We no longer know how to be present because we're constantly worried about representing our presence to others. The sunset stops being beautiful in itself and becomes beautiful only as a backdrop for our performance of being someone who appreciates sunsets. Food stops being savored and becomes merely photographed. Imagine living a moment of happiness without feeling obligated to prove your happiness to others. Leisure, writes Han, is not laziness, but resistance to the logic of performance. It's in the pause, in silence, in undocumented experience that we can recover the possibility of being without appearing. In a society where visibility has become the supreme value, claiming the right to anonymity is a subversive act. Not being seen, not being known, not having an opinion on everything, not being available for constant commentary. Han defends what he calls the right to opacity. Not everything in us needs to be transparent, accessible, shareable. There are parts of human experience that can only exist in shadow, away from the spotlights of permanent performance. The person who walks through the city without documenting their walk is practicing an act of resistance. Those who have thoughts that never become tweets are preserving a sacred space of interiority. Those who live moments that never become posts are recovering the possibility of unmediated experience. When two people manage to stop performing for each other, something extraordinary happens. They truly meet. Not the edited, optimized, marketable versions of themselves, but real people with contradictions, imperfections, opacities. Love, writes Han, is impossible in the performance society because love requires stopping showing oneself to simply be with the other. True love happens not on stage, but backstage, in moments when we don't need to represent anything. What if we stopped living as if someone were always watching? What if we recovered the courage to have experiences that no one else needs to validate? What if we rediscovered the pleasure of simply being without needing to prove that we are? Han invites us to this reclamation. Contemplative life is not escape from the world, but return to oneself. It's in this return, away from cameras, likes, audiences, that perhaps we can rediscover not only who we are, but the simple and radical joy of existing without needing to justify our existence through performance. The question that keeps echoing is not whether we can stop performing. Perhaps that's impossible in our era. The question is whether we can create spaces, even small ones, where we can experience the strange and wonderful freedom of simply being without audience, without script, without need for applause. Maybe it's in these moments stolen from performance that we rediscover something we almost lost, the pure experience of being alive prior to any representation, deeper than any image, more real than any like. Because in the end, the question isn't whether being is the same as appearing. The question is, when was the last time you simply were, without showing yourself to anyone?